Some things don't come back, unless they were never done waiting. The rain started before sunset and never stopped, the kind that turned asphalt into mirrors and silence into something heavy, something that pressed against your chest if you stood still long enough, and that's exactly what he did. He stood still, right outside the iron gates of Victor Hale's estate, an old German shepherd with dull fur and tired eyes, soaked through, unmoving, like time didn't apply to him anymore, like hunger didn't matter, like pain had already lost its meaning somewhere. Along the miles he must have walked to get here, and I remember watching the security feed that night, leaning back in a leather chair that cost more than most people's cars, whiskey untouched in my hand, because something about the dog didn't sit right with me, not fear, not curiosity, something deeper, something I couldn't name, and I hate not being able to name things, especially not in my own territory. Get rid of it, I said at first, voice low, controlled, the way it always was, but the guard hesitated, just a second too long. Sir, it hasn't moved in hours, he said, and I leaned forward, narrowing my eyes at the screen, zooming in, expecting weakness, desperation, something that would explain it, but there was none, just those eyes, steady, focused, locked onto the gates like they weren't a barrier but a destination, like they were the end of something important, and that's when it hit me, not all at once, not clean, more like a crack in glass spreading outward, a flicker of memory I hadn't invited, hadn't wanted, a different night, years ago, colder, quieter, the smell of damp cardboard and rust in the air, a place I had no reason to be except I didn't like leaving things unfinished, and there it was, a small shape by a trash pile, barely breathing, wrapped in something that used to be a bag, shaking like it had already decided the world wasn't worth fighting for, and I remember standing over it, telling myself to walk away, that it wasn't my problem, that I didn't do things like this, but my hand moved anyway, slow, deliberate, pulling it out, feeling how light it was, how close it was to disappearing, and I didn't say anything, didn't make a promise, didn't need to, I just carried it out of there like it belonged somewhere else, like it belonged with me, and now, years later, the same kind of eyes stared back through the storm, older, sharper, but unmistakable, and I felt something shift inside me, something I hadn't felt since that night, something human, something dangerous in its own way, because it meant I remembered, and remembering meant I cared, and I don't allow myself to care, not anymore, not after everything, but the dog didn't move, didn't break eye contact, didn't leave, and I realized with a slow, unwelcome certainty that it wasn't here by accident, it hadn't wandered in, it had come for something, for someone, and as the rain kept falling and the seconds stretched longer than they should have, I set the glass down, stood up, and for the first time in years, I walked toward something without knowing what it would cost me, because deep down, I already knew, he wasn't waiting for a place, he was waiting for me. The gates opened slower than they should have, metal grinding against metal like the house itself was hesitating, like it knew something I did not, and I stepped out into the rain without an umbrella, without a coat, because none of that mattered anymore, not with those eyes still locked on me, not with the weight of recognition pressing against my chest harder than the storm ever could, and the closer I got, the clearer it became, the scars along his side, the slight limp in his back leg, the way his ears twitched but never dropped, alert even now, even after everything, even after years that should have broken him, and I stopped a few feet away, close enough to hear his breathing over the rain, slow, steady, controlled, like he had trained himself not to waste anything, not even a breath, and I realized then that he had not just survived, he had learned, he had adapted, he had become something more than what I found that night, something stronger, something that did not forget, and my throat tightened in a way I did not expect, in a way I did not allow, because I do not get caught off guard, I do not let the past walk back into my life uninvited, but here it was, standing right in front of me, soaked and silent, waiting, always waiting, and I crouched down slowly, careful, not because I was afraid of him, but because I was afraid of what it meant if I was right, if this was really him, if this was really Rex, the dog I had left behind when everything changed. When the world I lived in demanded I choose power over anything that could make me hesitate, and I remember that day too clearly now, the decision, the distance, the way I told myself it was temporary, that I would come back for him, that I would not forget, but time has a way of rewriting promises, and power has a way of burying them, and yet he had not forgotten, not once, not for a second, because he was here now, after miles and years and everything in between, and he had found me, not the man I used to be, but the man I became, and still he came, still he stood, still he looked at me like nothing had changed, and I reached out my hand. Slow, deliberate, the same way I did that night behind the warehouse, the same way I did when he was small and shaking and barely holding on, and for a second that felt longer than it should have, he did not move, he just watched, measured, certain, and then finally, quietly, he stepped forward, closing the distance on his own terms, pressing his head lightly against my palm like it was the most natural thing in the world. Like this was where he was always meant to be, and something inside me broke open in that moment, something I had kept locked away for years, because I understood now, he had not come back to be saved, he had come back because he never stopped believing I would be the man who saved him again, and I did not know if I still was that man anymore, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty as the rain kept falling and the world around us faded into nothing, this was not over, not even close. Because if Rex had found me after all this time, then something else was coming too, something that had been following him, something I could not see yet, but I could feel it, waiting just beyond the gates. I did not bring him inside right away, not because I did not want to, but because something in the air had changed the moment he touched my hand, something subtle, something that most people would miss, but I have built my entire life on noticing what others ignore, and Rex felt it too. I could see it in the way his ears shifted, not fear, not aggression, just awareness, like he was listening to something far beyond the rain, beyond the walls, beyond the illusion of safety this place was supposed to represent, and I straightened slowly, my hand lingering on his head for a second longer than necessary before I pulled away, scanning the perimeter without making it obvious. The guards were still in position, the cameras still active, everything exactly as it should be, and yet it was not. Because Rex did not come here for comfort, he came here with purpose, and that meant something had driven him, something strong enough to push an old, retired dog across miles of unfamiliar streets just to find me, and I turned slightly toward the nearest guard, my voice calm but carrying enough weight that he understood this was not a suggestion. Check the outer perimeter again, all of it, he nodded without hesitation, stepping away to relay the order, and I looked back down at Rex, crouching once more, lowering myself to his level, because whatever this was, whatever he had carried with him to my gates, I needed to understand it. Where did you come from, huh? I said quietly. Not expecting an answer, but he gave me one anyway, not with sound, not with movement, but with direction, his head turning just slightly toward the road behind him, toward the darkness beyond the reach of the estate lights, and I followed that gaze, narrowing my eyes, focusing on the stretch of wet asphalt that disappeared into the distance, empty at first glance, silent except for the rain, but then I saw it, faint, almost nothing, a set of tire tracks cutting through the water, fresh enough that the edges had not fully blurred, leading straight toward the gates, then stopping, as if whoever had been there had watched, waited, and then decided not to come closer. And a cold realization settled in my chest. Rex had not just found me, he had been followed, not closely, not carelessly, but deliberately, and that meant this was not coincidence, this was intention, and I looked back at him, studying him more carefully now, the dirt along his legs, the slight tremor in his muscles that had nothing to do with age, the way his breathing stayed controlled despite the distance he must have covered. He had been running, not wandering, running with direction. Running with urgency, and yet he stopped here, he chose this place, this moment, as if he knew this was the only place left to go, and something tightened in my chest again, sharper this time, because I understood what that meant. He trusted me, not the man I became, not the name people feared, but the man who once reached into the dark and pulled him out without asking for anything in return, and I was not sure that man still existed, not fully, not after everything I had done to survive, but as Rex took one small step closer, pressing against my leg like he had years ago, like no time had passed at all, I realized something I had not allowed myself to consider in a long time. Maybe he was not here to remind me of who I was, maybe he was here to show me who I still could be, and somewhere beyond the gates, beyond the rain, beyond the thin line between past and present, something waited, something that had followed him all the way here, and this time, I would not walk away. I did not wait for the guards to report back because I already knew what they would say, nothing out of place, nothing obvious, nothing that would justify the tension tightening across my shoulders, and that was exactly the problem, because the most dangerous things never announce themselves, they stay quiet, patient, just beyond the edge of certainty, and Rex understood that better than anyone, better than most men I had worked with, because he did not relax, not even for a second, his body close to mine but his attention fixed outward, toward the road, toward the invisible line where instinct meets memory, and I exhaled slowly, forcing my thoughts into order, because if something had followed him here, then standing still was not an option, not tonight, not with him back in my life, not with whatever past I thought I buried now standing at my gates in the rain, and I made a decision before I could second guess it. Open the gates fully, I said, my voice cutting through the storm, and the guards hesitated just enough to notice, just enough to remind me how unusual that order was, because I do not open my gates without reason. I do not invite the unknown closer, but this was different. This was already here, already inside the edges of my control, and I stepped forward, past the line where the lights ended and the darkness began, feeling the rain hit harder against my face as if the world outside the estate had its own weight, its own presence, and for a moment everything went quiet in my mind, no calculations, no strategies, just the sound of water hitting pavement and the steady rhythm of Rex's breathing beside me. And then he moved, not fast, not reckless, just a few steps ahead, his nose lowering slightly, tracking something I could not see, something he had been following for miles, and I followed without hesitation, because whatever path brought him here was now mine to walk as well, the wet road stretching out in front of us, empty but not untouched, the faint marks still visible under the shifting reflections of the streetlights, and I crouched briefly, running my fingers over the surface, feeling the subtle difference in texture where rubber had pressed down recently, fresh enough to matter, recent enough to mean whoever had been here had not gone far, and a quiet understanding settled in. This was not over, this had only just begun, and when I stood again, Rex was already looking back at me, not questioning, not uncertain, just waiting for me to catch up, like he always had, like he always would, and I almost smiled at that, almost, because there was something grounding about it, something real in a world that had become too calculated, too controlled, and I stepped forward again, matching his pace, letting him lead for the first time in years, because he knew something I did not, he had seen something I had not, and if he had come all this way to bring me here, then I would see it too, whatever it was, whatever it meant, and as we moved further away from the estate, the lights behind us fading into the storm, I realized something that should have been obvious from the beginning. Rex did not just come back to find me, he came back to take me somewhere, and wherever that was, it was waiting for us now. The farther we moved from the estate, the quieter everything became, not peaceful quiet, but the kind that made every sound feel sharper, the rain hitting puddles in uneven rhythms, the distant hum of a passing car miles away, the soft, steady steps of Rex just ahead of me, guiding without hesitation, and I let him lead because stopping him felt wrong, like interrupting something that had already been decided long before tonight. And the road curved slightly to the left, away from the main highway, into an older part of the city where the streetlights were spaced too far apart and the buildings felt forgotten, the kind of place people drove past without looking twice, but Rex slowed here, just a fraction, enough for me to notice, enough for me to understand that whatever we were heading toward was close, and my senses sharpened automatically, every detail registering, every shadow holding potential meaning, because I have learned the hard way that places like this are never empty. They just hide what matters better than most. And then he stopped completely, right in the middle of the road, his body going still in a way that had nothing to do with exhaustion and everything to do with certainty, and I stepped up beside him, following his line of sight to a building on the corner, brick walls worn down by time, windows dark, a flickering sign hanging above a closed door that probably had not seen business in years, and at first glance it looked like nothing, just another abandoned place in a city full of them, but Rex took one slow step toward it, then another, and I felt that same tightness in my chest again, because he was not guessing, he knew, and I moved with him, closing the distance until we stood just a few feet from the entrance, the rain dripping off the edge of the broken awning above us, the door slightly uneven in its frame, and I reached out, pressing my hand lightly against the wood, feeling the faint vibration on the other side, not movement, not noise, something else, something subtle but present, and I pulled my hand back slowly, my mind already shifting into focus, connecting pieces that were not obvious yet, because Rex had not brought me here by accident, and he had not stopped at the gates for comfort. He had waited until I was ready to follow, until I chose to step beyond what I controlled, and now we were here, at the edge of something I could not yet see clearly, and I glanced down at him, expecting tension, expecting alertness, but what I saw instead made me pause. His posture had changed, not defensive, not aggressive, just still, like he had reached the end of his task, like this was the place he needed to show me, and the realization hit me slowly, heavier than anything before. He did not bring me here to face something, he brought me here to find something, and as I looked back at the door, at the faint outline of light slipping through the cracks where it did not belong, I understood one thing with absolute clarity: whatever was inside had been waiting just as long as Rex had, and I had just stepped into the moment where everything finally came back together. The moment I pushed the door, it did not resist, it gave way too easily, like it had been waiting for that exact touch, that exact second, and the faint light I saw from outside stretched across the floor in a narrow line, warm against the cold, abandoned shell of the building, and I stepped inside slowly, every instinct alert but controlled, not because I expected danger, but because I understood something else entirely was waiting here, something quieter, something that did not need force to make itself known, and Rex moved past me without hesitation, his pace calm, deliberate, like he had already memorized every inch of this place before bringing me here, and I followed, my eyes adjusting to the dim interior, broken furniture pushed against the walls, dust layered thick across surfaces that had not been touched in years, except for one path, a single clear stretch across the floor where the dust had been disturbed recently, leading deeper inside, and that path pulled my attention immediately, because it meant presence, it meant intention, and Rex stayed on it without wavering, guiding me further until we reached the back of the building where the light grew stronger, spilling out from a half-open door that should not have been open at all, and I slowed there, just for a second, feeling something shift in my chest again, that same unfamiliar tension that came from not knowing, from stepping into something I could not control, and I have spent years building a life where nothing surprises me, where every move is calculated, every outcome predicted, but this was different, this was not about power, this was about something I left behind without realizing it mattered, and I pushed the door open fully, the hinges creaking softly as the room revealed itself, small, clean, impossibly out of place in the middle of everything else, a single lamp casting warm light over a table, a chair, a folded blanket in the corner, and for a moment I just stood there, taking it in, because none of it made sense, not yet, and then I saw it, sitting on the table, a worn metal tag attached to a collar I recognized instantly, the same collar I had placed around Rex years ago, back when he was small enough to fit in one hand, back when I still believed I could hold on to things like that without losing them, and I stepped closer without thinking, reaching out, my fingers brushing against the cold metal as something tightened in my chest, something heavier than memory, something closer to realization, because this was not something Rex could have brought here on his own, this had been kept, preserved, protected, and that meant someone else had been here, someone who knew, someone who understood what Rex meant, what I meant to him, and as that thought settled in, I became aware of something else. Not sound, not movement, but presence, subtle, steady, just beyond the edge of the room, and Rex shifted beside me, not tense, not alarmed, just aware, like he had reached the final step of whatever path he had been following, and I straightened slowly, my gaze lifting from the collar to the doorway behind me, because I knew, without needing to see it yet, that we were not alone, and whatever had been waiting here all this time was about to step into the light. You kept it. The words did not come from me, but they might as well have, because the voice behind me carried something I had not heard in years, not fear, not respect, something quieter, something steadier, and I turned slowly, already knowing this was not going to be what I expected, because nothing tonight had been, and in the doorway stood a man I did not recognize at first glance, late 30s maybe, worn jacket, hands empty, posture relaxed in a way that told me he was not here to threaten, not here to challenge, just present, like he had every right to be in this room, like this place belonged to him in a way my world never could, and Rex moved then, not toward me, not toward the door, but toward him, calm, certain, stopping just close enough to brush against his leg before settling beside him like it was the most natural position in the world, and that told me everything I needed to know before a single word was said. "He found you," the man added quietly, his eyes meeting mine without hesitation, not defiant, not submissive, just direct, and I studied him for a second longer than necessary, because I am used to reading people, measuring intent, finding weakness, but there was none of that here, just someone who understood more than he should, and I stepped back slightly, creating space, not out of caution, but because something about this moment demanded it. "You have something that belongs to me," I said, my voice steady, my gaze shifting briefly to the collar still resting on the table, and the man followed my glance before shaking his head once, slow, deliberate. "No," he replied, just as calm. "I kept something that belonged to him," and his hand rested lightly on Rex's head, not possessive, not controlling, just familiar, like it had been there many times before, and I felt that same tightness in my chest again, sharper now, more defined, because I understood what he meant. Even if I did not want to admit it yet, he was found about 5 years ago, the man continued, his voice steady, like he had told this story to himself enough times that it no longer shook him. "In bad shape, alone, no tag, no chip, nothing that told anyone where he came from, but he did not act like a stray, he did not trust easily, he did not follow commands unless they made sense to him, and that is when I knew he had a past, a real one," and I did not interrupt, because every word lined up with what I already knew, what I had seen tonight, what I had felt. The moment I looked into those eyes again, it took months before he let me get close, he added, his hand still resting on Rex, who did not move, did not react, just stayed there, steady, like he was listening too. But once he did, he never left, not really, even when he was right beside me, he was always waiting for something else, and the room felt smaller somehow, quieter, like everything was narrowing down to a single point I could not avoid anymore, and I glanced at Rex again, really. Looked this time, at the way he stood, the way he held himself, not between us, not choosing sides, just present, like he had brought two parts of his world together and was waiting to see what we would do with it, and the man exhaled softly, almost like he had been holding something back this entire time. "He started leaving about a week ago," he said, his eyes never leaving mine, just disappearing for hours, then longer, then days, until tonight, when he did not come back at all, and a quiet understanding settled over me, heavier than anything before, because this was not just a reunion, this was a decision, one Rex had already made long before either of us realized what it meant, and I took a slow step forward, my voice lower now, more honest than I had allowed it to be in years. "He did not get lost," I said, and the man nodded once, like he already knew, like he had accepted it before I even arrived. "No," he replied, just as quietly, "he did not, he chose to come back." And Rex finally moved, just one step, positioning himself between us for the first time, not as a barrier, not as protection, but as something else entirely, something that made my chest tighten in a way I could not ignore anymore, because I understood it now. He was not here to be claimed, he was here to make us both face what we meant to him. Silence settled in the room, not empty, not awkward, but heavy, like something important had finally surfaced and neither of us knew how to move around it without breaking it, and Rex stood between us, steady, calm, his presence anchoring the moment in a way no words could, and I realized then that this was not about who he belonged to, not really, it was about what he had carried with him all these years, something neither of us had fully understood until now, and I looked at the man again. Really looked this time, at the way he stood without tension, without challenge, just open, like he had already accepted whatever this moment would ask of him, and that alone told me more than any explanation could, because men in my world do not stand like that. They calculate, they defend, they prepare, but he did none of that, and that meant he was not here to take anything from me, and for the first time that night, I felt the edge of something unfamiliar ease slightly, not trust, not yet, but something close enough to let the next question come without force. "Why keep the collar?" I asked, my voice quieter now, less guarded than before, and he followed my gaze again, a faint shift in his expression, not regret, not pride, something simpler, something honest, "because he never let it go," he said, and that answer landed deeper than I expected, because I understood it immediately, not as a fact, but as a truth. Something Rex had held onto even when everything else changed, even when I was no longer there, even when years passed without a reason to believe I would ever come back, and I exhaled slowly, my hand resting briefly against the edge of the table, grounding myself in something real, something present, because this was not just about memory anymore, this was about what remained after memory faded, and Rex shifted then, just slightly, turning his head toward me, then back toward the man, not confused, not uncertain, just aware, like he was measuring something we could not see, something deeper than either of us had words for, and I understood it in that moment, clearer than anything before. He was not choosing between us, he was connecting us, bridging something that neither of us had been able to complete alone, and that realization changed everything, because it meant this was not an ending, not a return to what was, but a continuation, something new built from what we both gave him, and I straightened slowly, meeting the man's gaze again, not as a threat, not as a rival, but as someone who had carried a part of something I once started, and for a second, neither of us spoke, because we did not need to. The understanding was already there, quiet but solid, and Rex stepped forward again, closing the space between us, his presence no longer dividing the room, but holding it together, and I reached out instinctively, my hand resting against his neck, feeling the steady warmth beneath his fur, the same as it had been years ago, the same as it would always be, and something in me settled with that, something that had been unsettled for longer than I realized, because I could finally see it for what it was, not a loss, not a mistake, but a choice that had led here, to this moment, to this connection that refused to break even after everything, and as I glanced once more at the collar on the table, then back at Rex, I knew one thing with absolute certainty: whatever came next, whatever this new path asked of me, I was not walking it alone anymore, and neither was he. The rain had softened by the time we stepped outside again, not gone, just quieter, like the storm had already said everything it needed to say, and the three of us stood there for a moment under the broken awning, not rushing, not forcing anything forward, because something important had already shifted, something that did not need noise or movement to be real, and Rex moved first, not toward the road, not back into the building, but slightly ahead, turning just enough to look at both of us before continuing forward at an easy pace, like he expected us to follow, like he knew we would, and I did not question it, not this time, because I had spent too many years controlling every direction, every outcome, and tonight had made one thing clear: some paths are not meant to be controlled, they are meant to be walked, and the man beside me stepped forward too, no hesitation, no need for permission, just a quiet understanding that whatever came next belonged to all three of us now, and we moved together down the wet street, the city stretching out around us, different than it had been before, not because it changed, but because because something I thought I lost had found its way back, not to return to what was, but to reshape what could be, and I glanced down at Rex as he walked, steady despite his age, every step deliberate, every movement carrying a quiet confidence that had nothing to do with strength and everything to do with purpose, and I realized then that he had never been lost, not really, not even when he was alone, not even when years passed without a trace of me. He had always been moving toward something, toward this moment, toward this connection that refused to break no matter how far it was stretched, and that kind of loyalty, that kind of certainty, it does not come from training, it does not come from instinct alone, it comes from something deeper, something that cannot be taught or taken, only given and carried forward, and I felt that truth settle into me in a way nothing else had in years, grounding, steady, undeniable, and the man walked beside me without speaking, not needing to fill the silence, not needing to define what this was, because some things do not need names to exist, and as we reached the end of the block, where the streetlights grew brighter and the road opened back into the larger city, Rex slowed slightly, just enough to glance back one more time, his eyes meeting mine, then shifting to the man beside me, and there was something in that look, something quiet but certain, like a question already answered, like a choice already made, and I understood it without needing to think, without needing to question. He was not asking us to choose him, he was asking us to choose what came next, together, and for the first time in a long time, I did not see that as a risk. I saw it as something else entirely, something I had not allowed myself to feel in years, something closer to trust, and as we stepped forward again, leaving the empty street behind us, I realized something that stayed with me long after the rain finally stopped. He did not come back to be saved, he came back to remind me that even a life built on control can still be changed by something as simple, and as powerful, as loyalty that never let go.